Hello and welcome to a new game from the Top Computer Chess Championship. There are big developments in the Premier Division. News number one is that Stockfish lost 2 games because it crashed twice. And I don't know exactly the nature of these 2 crashes, but I know that at 3 of them you're eliminated from the tournament. And that would be a big shame because there's a very big fight going on between the first 3, ElzChess, Leela and Stockfish. And this brings me now to the current leader after 29 rounds, ElzChess, this monster created by Adam Treat, who created the ElzChess engine, and Mark Jordan, aka JJosh, a very active member of the Leela community, who created the Stein network, which is very, very strong, and it's also used by Leela Chess, who in the current moment is killing it in the CCC 10 semifinals. So ElzChess is very, very strong in first position, and he won not less than 11 times already in the Premier Division compared to Stockfish's 9 and Leela's 6. And which is even more amazing is that he won with black 5 times. And that is quite an achievement in this very, very strong field. ElzChess is just killing it and beats everyone, especially the bottom half of the participants here. Soon I will probably cover also some ElzChess games because he's just playing absolutely phenomenally. But today we have another Leela game, and this time, just to mix it up a bit, we have a game also against Houdini and also in the Sicilian defense. Also started out as an Eidorf, but this one transposed into a Scheveningen. So the opening moves are the same as in the previous video, and if you would like to know more about these moves, the ideas behind them, then check out my previous video. There should be a link in the upper right of the screen. So here now after a6, which leads us into the Najdorf, we don't have the craziness with bishop g5 and f4, we don't have the English attack, and we don't have bishop d3, which was played in the previous video, but we have bishop e2. This is the first most popular move in this position, absolutely normal move. And here we now go into the Scheveningen with e6. Now e6 blocks in this bishop on this diagonal, but also guards d5, which, remember, in the Najdorf was a big hole, and the whole game revolved around basically that weakness. In the Scheveningen, this square is covered to the expense of blocking this diagonal. The game now continued with castles, bishop e7, f4, and knight d7. Usually this knight is developed to c6 in these structures, but in this one we have knight d7. And with this, the book moves ended and Leela is on her own. And in this position, GMs played either king h1, to get out from this potentially dangerous diagonal where the queen could pin this knight. And another move that has been played is bishop e3 with the same idea, guarding this diagonal. But Leela played a different move because neither bishop e3 neither king h1 was aggressive enough for her style. So she came up with a novelty here and played g4, which is an aggressive move, but also a logical move, since now this knight is on d7 and it's taking away the d7 square from the f6 knight. g5 would threaten to chase this knight back either to g8 or after castles to e8, and then white would have a big advantage in development, and his attack could be very, very dangerous. So in order to prevent g5, we now have d5 attacking the e4 square and allowing this knight to go to e4. And black got in his d5 liberating move with this, but unfortunately for him not in the best conditions, because now after e5, saving this pawn, and knight e4, Leela now could take on e4, and this pawn on d5 lands on e4, and it's kind of weak, so Leela could target it in the future. The game now continued with bishop e3, guarding this diagonal, developing the bishop, and allowing this rook at some point to come to the open d file. Queen c7, and now queen e1, allowing the rook to come to d1, but also wanting to come to g3, where the queen would help these pawns advance on the king side. Houdini now played b6. Of course, this bishop will come to b7. This diagonal here is blocked, so b7 is the only logical choice, and from b7 the bishop would also defend this pawn on e4. The game now continued with rook d1, bishop b7, and now a4. These flank moves on the a and h file are always fascinating. The idea is to block black's queenside expansion with b5. Houdini replied with castles, and now we have queen g3, rook d8, preparing to contest the open d file, and now we have c3, another logical move. The pawn defends itself since it was attacked by the queen, only the knight defending it. Now with c3 the pawn is defended, the knight is defended, and the b4 square is also well under control. Houdini continued with rook e8, allowing this bishop to go back and defend the pawns. g5, bishop f8, and now h4. Leela is not shy at all when it comes to attacking. Now we have knight c5, attacking this pawn on a4, but Leela says, please take the pawn, I don't care. And indeed, black doesn't really have time to take this pawn, because Leela's attack here on the king side is just very, very strong. This position is already critical, and black needs to be very careful here. If Houdini would have taken here on a4, then after g6 he would be in big trouble, because after f takes on g6 there's h takes on g6, and black doesn't really have a choice here. He can't take on g6 and open the g and h files, so he has to play h6 to block the g file. And h6 also gives black a long-term advantage in this protected passed pawn. But in the meantime, his e6 pawn is very, very weak now, since this pawn took on g6. And white can attack it with knight, bishop, and queen. And black's position is not easy at all. Here now, after rook d2 defending the pawn, after b5, bishop g4 is already very strong, forcing the bishop back to defend, and queen h3, and black doesn't really have any ways to defend this pawn anymore, because queen e7 runs into knight c6, forking these two, and queen b6 is potentially even worse. It places the queen in the firing line of that bishop, and after something like bishop e6, rook e6, knight e6 would be completely winning for white, because not only the queen but also the rook is attacked. So this would be winning for white, not a great idea. Here after g6, instead of f takes on g6, black could take with the h pawn, but this is even worse, because now after h takes on g6, black still doesn't have a choice, has to take on g6, leaving again this e6 pawn weak. But this time white can also take on g6 and has the g file and the h file for the attack. After something like queen f7, for example, Leela could even just simply exchange the queens and play f5 here, with a very, very big threat of taking on e6, and suddenly the black king would find himself as the life of a party that he didn't want to attend. So after g6, instead of taking with these pawns, black can also try knight b2, attacking this rook, but after rook d2 the knight has to go to d3, and now we could have g takes on f7, and after queen takes f5 again, very, very strong. Black has to take the pawn, but after knight f5 white has multiple threats. Knight a6 check, forking these two, knight d6 check, forking queen and rook, and this would be unholdable here for black. So here after h5, Houdini assessed the position correctly, and he didn't lose time with knight a4. He went to d3 immediately with the knight, and now we still have g6 and f takes, h takes, and Houdini will still have to play h6. He has no other choice. He can't allow opening up the position. But before he did that, he played bishop d5, defending this pawn, not fearing pawn takes here, because then the king can hide behind the pawn. And maybe black could survive somehow, but white is still much, much better in this position. However, after bishop d5, Leela played rook d2 to defend this pawn, and now Houdini got in h6. And Leela continued logically with bishop g4, targeting this pawn, and we have now queen c4, a very nice way of defending this pawn with both bishop and queen. If this bishop would have gone to c8 to defend this pawn, then the queen wouldn't have a square to defend the pawn. However, with the bishop coming here, queen c4 is a good place for the queen to defend this weakness. And the queen is also attacking a4. Leela now continued with queen h3, putting as much pressure on e6 as she can. But now Houdini played bishop c5, not allowing knight takes on e6 because of bishop takes on e3 with check. So instead of taking on e6, also because the a4 pawn is also hanging now, the queen wants to take it, we have bishop back defending the pawn. But now bishop takes on d4, Houdini takes out this very strong knight on d4, pawn takes, and now we have queen b4 attacking this pawn now twice. So Leela played here bishop g4 to defend the pawn. Pause the video if you would like to see why this pawn is not hanging now, and if you would like to work out yourself what would be Leela's move here after knight takes on b2. Well, the move is rook b1, quite simply, pinning this knight and winning it next move. So the pawn is not really hanging on b2, and Houdini played instead queen takes on a4, taking the other pawn. To which Leela now responded with rook g2, continuing her attack. She wants to play f5 and then also f6, and once this pawn reaches f6, these two pawns would be just quite simply too much for black. Also after f6, bishop h6 and pawn takes, queen takes would be a big threat. So here now Houdini defended with rook d7, and after f5, obviously something like rook e7 defending this pawn doesn't work because of f6. So black has no choice, has to take this pawn on f5, and now we have bishop takes attacking the rook, so we have rook c7, and now queen h4. And we enter now a phase of the game in which Leela tries to get this pawn on e4 and also try to exchange these light squared bishops. If she manages to do that, then she will manage to get rid of this blockading bishop on light squares, and that would allow her pawns to march up the board and win the game. For example, if now it would be Leela's move, then after bishop takes and queen takes on e4, these pawns are ready to roll, and it may seem that this pawn is pinned to the queen, and this maybe allows knight e5 since the pawn can take, but Leela would have here queen d5 check, and then she could take this knight either with the pawn or with the queen, since this rook is threatening mate on f8, so the queen is not really hanging. But here in this position, it's not Leela's turn, it's Houdini's turn. And after queen h4, Houdini defended very well with queen c4, defending this checking square on d5, also defending the knight. So it is now Leela's turn to come up with something, and she came up with rook g3, renewing the threat on e4. Again, if it would be her turn to move, then she could take this pawn, because after bishop takes and queen takes, knight e5 wouldn't work now because of rook c1, attacking the queen, and also this rook on c7. And black has nothing better than to take on c1, but after bishop takes and rook takes, king g2, and this knight is still pinned, and white would be winning. Also, after queen takes on e4, rook takes on e5 doesn't work because of rook f3, threatening mate on f8. And if rook c8 now to defend the back rank, then Leela has queen b7, and she's threatening here rook f7, and then rook takes on g7, rook takes on h7, check check, and then queen takes on g7 mate, and this rook is still attacked. So here Houdini would be forced to play rook e8, but then after rook f7 there's no defense against rook g7, the queen has to take, and after queen f7 and king h8, Leela has this sack with bishop h6, again threatening mate on g7, and if this pawn takes, then mate on h7. So rook g3, tricky move, renewing the threat. It's Houdini's turn now to come up with something, with a defense, and he played here rook e7. Houdini is removing this rook from the c file to get it out from this skewer, and it's also planning to take here on e5 with this rook while the other one defends the back rank. And it looks like that Houdini now has everything under control, but this is the moment when Leela draw out the ace from her sleeve with b3. A very, very powerful move. First of all, if the queen takes on b3, then the queen is not pinning the d4 pawn anymore, and after bishop takes and queen takes, the tricks with knight e5 and rook e5 don't work anymore. But in this position, since now the queen is not attacking the d4 square, Leela even has bishop h6, and after g takes and queen takes, this would be lights out after rook h3. There's no way to stop the mate on h8. So that's why, instead of taking the pawn here, Houdini played queen c3, still attacking this pawn on d4 and not allowing bishop takes on h6. But as I mentioned, now there's no pin on the d4 pawn, and this now allows finally Leela to win down that pawn. And now we have bishop takes, queen takes, and now these tricks with knight takes on e5 don't work. There's this check, and then take the knight. Also, if the rook takes, just pawn takes rook, and white is winning. So these tricks not working. Houdini played here knight b4, but at this point the game is essentially over because there's no stopping these two pawns. Eventually, Leela will manage to exchange some pieces, bring in the king, and help those pawns promote. The game now continued with rook f7, trying to take here and then mate on a8 with the queen. So we have queen c6 blocking this diagonal, also trying to exchange queens, but Leela played here queen f5. But now we have queen e6, again trying to exchange the queens. This time Leela accepts though, takes on e7, rook takes, queen takes, rook takes, and now the king is coming to e4, and these pawns will be rolling. Rook e8, king f3, knight d5, king e4, knight c3 check, king d3, knight back to d5. This knight is stubborn and is trying to check the king around, so here Leela played bishop c1, and after b5, bishop d2, trying to tame the pony by taking away these checking squares and allow the king to get to e4 and finally chase away that knight and get these pawns moving forward. We now have b4 and king c4, rook d8, rook g1, knight b6 check, king d3, knight d7, king e4, rook b8, and if now d5 comes, then black has knight c5 check and take on b3, so we have bishop e3. And now Leela is really threatening to push d5 since the c5 is on the cover. But now comes rook e8, blocking again both pawns. If the d pawn moves, then white loses e5. But rook a1, attacking this pawn, and black can do nothing. Leela will win down now the a pawn, and slowly all the black pawns are falling. We have this check now, and then Leela can take on g7, and the game won't last for long now. We have this check, and after king f5, knight h1, a very weird move, putting the knight in the corner and allowing this bishop to imprison the knight by taking away these squares. But it doesn't matter. After rook a8, rook f7, this pawn is now ready to become a queen, and here after king d5, the game was finally adjudicated in Leela's favor, as there's no stopping g7, rook f8, and then queening Gary. Another very nice attacking game in the Sicilian. And in the end, I would like to thank again to Mr. Adolf Stips for his contribution to my channel, and invite everyone to please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games, you may like them. And thanks for watching, and see you soon. Take care.